Welcome to this DW Business Special, looking at how Turkey's role in the global economy will develop under the continued reign of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. To talk about this, I'm joined today by Daron Acemoglu, Professor of Economics at MIT and the author of several books, his latest titled Power and Progress. Professor Acemoglu, President Erdogan's first decade in power was marked by steady economic growth. He even won international praise for being a reformer. Today, he's presiding over an economy that's crippled by inflation, and he's garnered an image as a rather authoritarian ruler. What happened?
It's a very complex question. I think when he first came to power, he was in a weak position, and he inherited reforms that had already been implemented because of the severe financial crisis of 2000, 2001 in Turkey, and he was not in a position to completely undo them and set up something new in their place. And that was a period of very healthy, high productivity performance, improvements in the Turkish economy, improvements in Turkish institutions. I don't think it lasted for 10 years. It was a shorter period, perhaps 5 years or so. But I think the infatuation of the foreign press with President Erdogan lasted for longer because they were looking for a role model for a Muslim democracy, even as he was already tightening his grip on power and setting up a system of control within his party and throughout the bureaucracy in the Turkish state and economy. But today, I think we are in the last phase of that. He has emerged as a more authoritarian figure, and few checks have remained, especially after the media has completely crumbled under restrictions and threats. And he set up the executive presidency, or you might call it the imperial presidency, which concentrates excessive amounts of power in the hands of the president. And the opposition still remains divided and ineffective, partly because of the tilted playing field that Erdogan has been able to create. But to me, it was still a surprise because the economy has been doing so badly. The devastating earthquake was a really one in a century sort of event, and it was not very well managed. Corruption was very important in some of the worst affected areas to sort of undergird the type of buildings and lack of oversight. And despite that, I was surprised how easily he won in some sense. I mean, this was the tightest election he's had to endure, but that was still a sort of easy victory.
Yeah, and you certainly weren't the only person that was surprised by that victory, especially considering the economic situation in Turkey. I want to look specifically now at what has happened to the lira in the last 10 years, because its value has absolutely plummeted in the last decade. Just take a look at this chart and don't be deceived by the upward line. This is how many lira you need to buy $1 US. Now, that has had a diverging effect on the Turkish stock market. While locals have piled in a bid to beat inflation, foreign investors have increasingly left. That's something I really want to ask you about, Professor Acemoglu. Foreign investors have clearly lost faith in the Turkish economy. What do you think it would take for Erdogan to reverse course on his policies, especially his tendency to lower interest rates?
I think it's going to be very difficult to reverse course here. You know, everything you said is absolutely true, and it builds on what we just talked about. Over the last 12, 13 years, the Turkish economy has been badly managed. And even when there was growth, it was low quality growth with little technological or productivity improvements driven by consumer credit and the construction sector, which plays an oversized role in Turkey, even by the standards of less developed economies. But there was one other factor. I think foreign investors were relatively forgiving and optimistic about Erdogan, and also international interest rates in Europe and the United States were very low. So they had a reason to go to the higher yields in Turkey. That has changed. So international investors are much pickier now, and it's going to be even harder to convince them to come back to Turkey. It's not impossible. The Turkish economy has still some great fundamentals. It has got an amazing location. It has some very well-educated, higher sort of echelon people, while at the same time it has a tremendous amount of room for improvement because it's still a young population with high demand. Much more investment in human capital can be made. So there is a bright future for the Turkish economy, but for that to be realized, a very different policy environment needs to be created, a very different institutional environment needs to be created. And I'm not sure at the moment that either President Erdogan is interested in doing that, or that even if he did it, it would be fully credible. And in particular, what that means is that foreign investors are not going to come running to Turkey. And that's not great because the Turkish economy needs a lot of resources right now. It needs resources because the earthquake really created a dire need for more aid for the affected areas, new buildings, new government programs. And the corporate sector and the banking sector need a lot of resources to restructure their balance sheet problems, their non-performing loans. So all of these require a complete turnaround in policy priorities. I don't think President Erdogan is going to be willing to do that because it means reversing many of his commitments, for example, to very, very low interest rates. That's become a personal issue almost for him. And if he did a sort of a halfway house, I don't think it would be credible. But my guess is that he's going to try to do something over the next few months because the balance of payment problems are mounting and they're going to make the economy difficult to shepherd through the next 6 months or so.
I want to move on now to look specifically at Turkey's international role because it has adopted a rather ambivalent stance on Russia's war in Ukraine. On the one hand, it's played a key role in brokering an agreement to export Ukrainian grain from ports blockaded by Russia, a deal that was extended only last month. On the other hand, though, Turkey has continued to do business with Russia, even expanding its ties. The country's tourism sector, for example, has had a big boost from wealthy Russian visitors who were no longer getting visas for Europe. And in fact, if you compare 2021, the year before the invasion, and 2022, you'll see that trade between Russia and Turkey has in fact more than doubled, most notably in gas supplies. And President Erdogan appears to have made a conscious decision to increase his reliance on Russian energy. The two leaders only recently jointly inaugurated Turkey's first nuclear power plant, built, owned and operated by Russia's state atomic energy company, Rosatom. Professor Acemoglu, what does this increasing reliance on Russian energy tell us about the direction Erdogan is taking Turkey?
Well, you've summarized it extremely well, but I think one little bit more of background would be helpful. Erdogan started moving away from the West as he turned more and more authoritarian over the last 10 years, partly because criticism from the press in the West and sometimes pressure from foreign governments is constraining his room for maneuver. So as a matter of principle, he does not feel committed to the West, to NATO. And in fact, as he felt squeezed more and more into a corner economically, he often used rhetoric to sort of stoke up anti-West nationalist feeling at home. So right now he has a transactional relationship both with the West and Russia. He is not committed to being an ally of Russia. Sometimes he's been opposed to Russian interests, worked against them. And even in Ukraine-Russian war, you're seeing him very skillfully play both sides. But I think all of this should be seen both within this geopolitical structure in which he feels he can get away with a transactional approach with both centers of power, and also the thing that we talked about a second ago, he has a great need for resources. And so in that sense, Russian energy, exports to Russia, Russian tourism, and closer ties with Russia are great opportunities for him as foreign investors from the West have become more picky, less willing to invest. Russian money, sometimes Gulf money, have helped him. So that's part of the broader understanding. Where will we go from here? I think the same transactional approach is going to continue. I don't think he's going to be an ally of Putin. He will continue to work with both Russia and Ukraine as he sees in his and in Turkey's interest. And but I don't also rule out a rapprochement with the US if he sees that to be in his interests.
Transactional is a great way to describe this because getting a coherent narrative is very difficult. While energy ties with Russia have expanded, Turkey did recently agree to stop the transit of Western-sanctioned goods to Russia. And that in turn was welcomed by the European Union, which remains by far Turkey's most important trading partner, representing almost a quarter of its imports and over 4/10 of its exports in 2022. Professor Acemoglu, how long do you think President Erdogan can continue to manage this balancing act between Russia and the West?
I don't see this coming to an end anytime soon. I think the big timestamp thing that he has to deal with is the economy. The question is, how long can he manage to keep the economy afloat without making a big course correction? And the big threat there are is related to the things that you've emphasized. Turkey has been losing its central bank reserves, foreign currency and gold, because there is less money coming in. Export revenues are not making up for it. And he's trying to maintain the dollar Turkish lira or euro Turkish lira exchange rate from going through the roof. So that meant that under his direction, the central bank has been managing the exchange rate very heavily, and other restrictions have come in, preventing Turkish households from going more into dollars. And that's sort of stabilized the Turkish lira. It's been hovering around 20 for a while, but I don't think that's sustainable. And this is the biggest issue that President Erdogan and his economics team will have to deal with. I think he can continue to juggle the US and Russia quite successfully, given his strategic position and the value that he adds both to the NATO alliance and to Russia, obviously, in this current environment.
I want to end by asking you a big question. To what extent do you think Erdogan has irreversibly changed Turkey's role on the global stage, both economically and geopolitically?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. I am convinced that he has fundamentally transformed many aspects of Turkish institutions. He has weakened democracy, but at the same time, he has empowered certain segments of society, the more provincial, religious, conservative, less educated groups who felt voiceless under previous more secular regimes. He has changed political dynamics. He has fundamentally impacted media freedom, although, I always hasten to add that media freedom was always very weak in Turkey under military dictatorships and secular governments. The most media felt unfree and not capable of speaking truth to power, but he has deepened that. He has reformed and in many ways changed the security services in Turkey. So I think Turkish democracy is going to have his mark in the decades to come. And I am still hopeful that Turkish democracy will survive, although there are weaknesses. There are major weaknesses that have been created over the last 15 years. What the next 5 years will imply remains to be seen. In terms of the international role that Turkey will play, that's of course connected to its democratic structure. It's also connected to something else that President Erdogan, especially after the very bold peace process that he himself initiated with the Kurds, came to an end, and he made a turnaround to a more nationalist stance. That's going to have an effect on Turkey's foreign relations because Turkey has become a much more nationalist country over the last 10 years. You know, the feeling of nationalism and suspicion of foreign powers, especially the West, has become endemic in Turkey. And we saw that in the current election. That was a very important bloc that actually helped President Erdogan get reelected. All of these are going to influence Turkish policy, Turkish foreign policy, and Turkey's role in the region. Whether it's irreversible, I think that remains to be seen.
Professor Acemoglu, we will have to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you for watching this edition of DW's Business Special. Do join us again next time. From me and the team, it's goodbye and take care.